Welcome back to day 4 of Dominion Menagerie previews, my scalding hot takes. Uh, get your Mandalorian memes ready because these are the ways, or 3 of them anyway. How do ways work? Well, they're landscapes like events or projects or landmarks. So you're not going to have more than 2 of landmarks, projects, events, and these in a game. And I think if I am reading right, you're not going to have more than one way in a particular game. There's 3 of them here. I think there's 20 of them total in the set, so a lot more. But how they work is apparently anytime in a game with a way, anytime you play an action card, you can either get the benefit on the action card, or you can say, nah, I don't want that. I want the way instead. Sure, there's some edge cases that are going to have to be hashed out in the rules, like Enchantress. Something's enchanted. Do you have the ability to take the way instead of whatever, the normal Enchantress thing? I don't know. My guess is it's still enchanted, regardless of which one you choose, but I don't know. Um, anyway, let's look at these. I guess in general, ways give you optionality, which makes all of your action cards stronger. And because, once and if the effect of the way might be better than the effect of the card itself, well, then you're rolling. Um, let's look at these in particular. Hopefully that'll help us evaluate things. Way of the Ox says +2 actions. So any of your cards can be a necropolis, not your cards, but your action cards, right? This only works on actions. It doesn't work on other effects. But any of your action cards can be a necropolis. And now I'm thinking, how does this interact with Caravan Guard? But again, I guess you maybe technically get +2 action. I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. How does this interact with durations? I don't know, but I'm not going to worry about it. I assume that the duration, if you play a duration card, like say I play a Wharf, right? And I decide to take my Way of the Ox instead and get +2 actions, the Wharf isn't going to stay out. I'm going to get no benefit at the start of next turn because I didn't play the effect of the card that gives me an effect at the start of next turn. So I just get the +2 actions and it doesn't stay out. So great. The biggest thing here, Way of the Ox, right? It's going to make me want to get more terminals or be happy to be over terminaled, happier at least, right? If I never buy a village and just buy all kinds of smithies, then it's kind of like having a bunch of nobles, right? Nobles you don't really want to use for plus actions, but um, if you get a bunch of nobles first, then it really alleviates the issue with um, being over terminaled, right? You draw 3 of them, and it's not sad that you have 3 smithies in your hand because you play one of them as your necropolis effect. You could do that with Way of the Ox, but you don't need to get nobles per se. Um, or even just if you have some really nice terminal, you could just start spamming terminals, and it's fine because once you draw 3, like you miss out on one of their effects, but you get the other 2. I guess I should note that. What should I note? I should note that you still don't, like, you probably still want regular villages if you're doing this, and you can get regular villages. At some point, you just need them a little bit less early and less often. But you still probably want more because, like, if you have 2 terminals in your hand, it's still kind of sad times, right? Yeah, you can play one of them as a necropolis, but that didn't really do anything for you because you were able to play the other action anyway. So in any case, I think this is very strong. You're mostly not going to run out of actions ever, and while it does take, uh, it's not like Champion where you could just play all your actions, but uh, well, it's a lot weaker than having a champion in play. But at the other hand, compared to having nothing, then you know you wouldn't be able to get those two smithies in hand realistically anyway, or you would have to build your deck differently. So this seems very, very strong to me. Although a little bit hard to evaluate, which is why I'm kind of grasping around. But let's move on. We've got a lot of stuff to cover today. Let's move on to the next thing, which is Way of the Mole. Uh, it lets you play your actions as +1 action, discard your hand +3 cards. So this is very much like a minion with one fewer cards. Yeah, it lets you churn through your deck. I was going to say pretty well, but I actually don't know that pretty well is really the right word. Um, it seems kind of difficult to take advantage of this, right? If my deck is full of action cards, then I can play action, action, and then my third action I can Way of the Mole and draw 3 more cards. It gives me like some kind of super draw to X deck. But that's if all 3 cards I'm drawing are action cards, which is a little bit hard to pull off. And I need to be able to play action, action, which means I can't have too many terminals, and or I'd need some villages. 3 cards is just not that many cards. So I think it's going to be hard to build a deck that's totally based around this, but you might be able to use it to just get a little bit deeper and further in a lot of situations as well. Where you have fewer than, you only have 1 or 2 important cards in hand, you can pitch your hand for some better cards. Yeah, what is there to say about this? Capitalism might work really well with this. Because it lets you draw cards more, and if everything you have is treasures, then you could do this in your buy phase, right? It's whenever you play an action. You could play actions in whatever phase you could play the card in. It doesn't matter that it's not the action phase. So, I don't know. This one seems less good to me than Way of the Ox. Maybe there's some situations where you can build your deck around it. I think mostly it's going to be here and there. It's kind of nice. Much less transformative than Way of the Ox, I think. But if you can really thin down a lot, then maybe it'll be very good. I guess something I should say about all of these is they're probably really good with trashers that like hyper trash you. You get your chapel and it still does something for you later because you can play it as not the chapel. You can play it as the way. And I guess any kind of really niche card that is sometimes going to be great and sometimes really sucks. So like Counting House, right? Sometimes you draw Counting House at the end of your shuffle and it's fantastic. Sometimes you draw Counting House at the beginning of your shuffle and it does absolutely nothing. Well, these take those absolutely nothing cases and let you do something else with them. Not that that's going to make Counting House particularly strong, but I guess Way of the Mole in particular is probably a lot better with Counting House because it lets you get to the end of your shuffle, the Way of the Mole does. So that might be something to watch out for. Also, just cheap ways to get lots of actions for some of these. So, Duchess looks better because it's a cheap action, it's easy to gain, kind of sucks, but if you need more of whatever the way effect is, it's easier to shove in your deck than some of the other things. So watch out for that kind of stuff. Situation cards, cards that are easier than normal to get because they come for free as a writer, things like that go up in value with these ways, I think. Let's move on to the last way of the day. Way of the day. This is Way of the Turtle. And Way of the Turtle lets you take your action card and say, okay, set this, instead of playing it now, set it aside. If you did, play it at the start of your next turn. So it kind of turns it into a duration card. I mean, it's not technically a duration card, but it gives you similar to where instead of getting the effect now, you get the effect at the start of your next turn. This seems mostly useful, for instance, in cases where you've got overdraw by a bit. You can turn your smithy into something that's a lot more like a barge, which is going to effectively give you duration draw. More importantly, though, you can do that kind of thing with villages. So a lot of the times, well, this can kind of be a village, right? I guess kind of not, because it doesn't give you your plus action back, right? So if I've drawn through my deck and I have an extra lab, it makes my lab terminal to have to play it at the end of my turn, because I don't get the plus action from it because I'm not playing it now, right? So do note that. But if anything really cares about you playing a lot of action cards, which very few things do, then you're playing it now, and you're playing it as the Way of the Turtle effect, and then you're playing it at the start of your next turn. So you've kind of played the action card twice, technically, under the rules. Not that you've gotten the effect twice, but I think, if I'm reading this right, you can perpetually have a card out of your deck. Effectively, you can trash any action card with this, because you can always say, okay, I'm going to set it aside and play it at the start of my next turn. So I play Chapel. Like, my Chapel is completely useless now, and I just want it out of my deck. So I play it and I say, I'm going to play it at the start of my next turn. The next turn starts, and I play it, and then I say, instead of wanting the effect now, I'm going to Way of the Turtle it and have it at the start of my next turn. And you just always do that every single turn and say, yeah, we'll put it off for later, put it off for later, put it off for later. So if there's a card that an action card I want out of my deck, Ruins might be a great example of this. You can just always Way of the Turtle it. Again, your terminal space is going to be an issue. But anyway, going back to the village thing that I started and then stopped talking about earlier, right, having a village at the start of your turn is very important to be able to draw in a lot of cases. So if you have an extra one, you can always make sure you start with the village effect, kind of like summoning it, where you just punt the village until the next turn, and then you play it and you draw your deck, and then you have an extra village, which you punt to the next start of the next turn. Gives you a lot of reliability. And I think that's the main thing for this. Sometimes, I guess you might be able to set up mega turns with this, because you can, instead of taking the same amount of stuff every turn, you can try to shift more of the things into a single turn. But you really need to have some big incentive to do a lot of things in one turn versus trying to do, an even amount of things on every turn, which, spike high and low, the high variance is very useful in some cases. It's not so useful in other cases. But more importantly here, even the cases where it is useful, this is going to be, it needs to be really useful, I guess is what I'm saying, because you're taking later instead of now. And now is usually more important than later. So I don't think you're actually going to use this hugely often. I think being able to effectively trash any action or thin any action out of your deck with this is going to be pretty nice. And, well, for some extra reliability, this is going to be pretty nice too. There may be other uses that I'm not thinking of, but if there are, let me know in the comments. Let's move on to 3 events, because we also got 3 events today. First one is Toil. Costs 2, gives you your buyback, and says you may play an action card from your hand. So this kind of like Way of the Ox, I think it was, whichever was this Ox. This was Ox, right? Gives you +2 actions. This one also lets you over terminal to some extent. Um, just note that by the time you're buying this, you cannot play any more cards from your hand other because you've already been buying things. Except that obviously you can buy another toil and play more action cards from your hand. But say you can't play any treasures after you've bought this. Unless you have one of the actions that lets you play a treasure, or you're going to buy a villa or something. The actions that let you play treasure being storyteller and black market. So do note that. But yeah, this lets you over terminal. It costs you some money to be able to over terminal, but particularly if those terminals are payload cards, right? It reduces the amount of money they give you, but you still get the other effects. So if I have a swindler in hand that I couldn't play because I had terminal collision and I didn't have the terminal space for it, I can spend 2 in a buy to get this. I get the buy back. I play the swindler gives me the 2 money back, right? So effectively, I've spent nothing because I've gotten everything back. I've spent the swindler in hand, and I've gotten the attack, and I haven't gotten the money from the swindler. So you don't want to really like rely on this and just say, "Oh, I'm swimming pretty," because right, you do come out if the thing isn't making you more than 2 money back, you're not really getting very far ahead economically. But most of these actions you'd be playing have some other benefit besides just giving you 2 money. And if they're giving you money, then any benefit is, if they're making you 2 money and something else, the something else you're getting is free just by playing this toil. So it helps you over terminal a little bit. Now, if in the case of Swindler, how useful is that? I mean, it's a little bit useful. If the attack is good, it's nice to be able to have that attack. But, right, the problem with terminal collision on your swindlers isn't like, oh, I didn't get to attack them as often. It's, I have less money than if I would have gotten a silver, right? So this doesn't really fix that problem, unless the actions are making you more than 2 money. So we saw livery the other day that made 3 money. Now, if you have too many of those, you could play extra ones using toil. Actually, livery is probably a great example, too, because the extra benefit is also nice, right? So I had my hand of 5 liveries. I could normally only play 1. I play 1, I have 3 money. I toil another, I have 4 money. I toil another, I have 5 money, right? I end up with 7 money, which isn't, great, but why did I have 5 liveries in hand anyway? But I have 7 money, I could buy, I don't know, another livery and then get 5 horses or something, right? So that's kind of nice. If I'm playing a goons, it lets me play extra goonses, and that means I'm going to be able to score points. If I'm playing, I don't know. I think mostly it's going to be payload that really works out better for this. But again, you might even be able to do stuff with draw cards, right? I play a smithy with this, I draw 3 cards. I can't play any treasures I have in my hand, but I can spend more money to play more actions, right? I could play a King's Court from my hand, and then that's going to let me play another action in my hand 3 times. So, right, because King's Court doesn't say if it's your action phase, play an action from your hand 3 times. It just says you may play an action card from your hand. It just says 3 times, right? Yeah. So I think this is, well, again, it's not like you want to go super crazy over terminaling, but it helps a fair amount if you have a bit of over terminaling, and you might be able to just really lean on this if there are a lot of terminal action payload cards with really nice effect. Bridge, do note it only makes you 1 money back, so I think bridge effects might actually well be worth it still, but yeah. You do need to make sure you can buy this often enough, I guess is my point with that. one note on here, I think another card that might work really well with Way of the Turtle would be Outposts. This might be a reason to get multiple Outposts because you want to see your Outpost very often. And on your Outpost turn, you could just, not this one, Way of the Mole. On your Outpost turn, you can, if you've got a bad hand, you can pitch it and look for something better. Yeah, anyway, let's move back. Commerce. Commerce is a 5-cost event. It says gain a gold per differently named card you've gained this turn. Okay. This is interesting. It's kind of expensive. 5. If you've been able to gain one card this turn, then this is effectively going to be a 5-cost gold, which is fine. The order you buy this in versus cards is going to matter, right? Normally, I guess normally if you're doing this, you probably want as many golds as you can get, so you probably want to buy it last. But if for some reason you want to get exactly 2 golds, then you can gain 2 other things and then buy this and then buy other stuff. They have to be differently named, of course. Yeah, I think money decks tend to want golds more than other decks. But money decks tend to not be able to gain, differently named cards and then still buy this. So but on the other hand, if you are drawing your deck, right, you might want to get a few more deck control components and then buy this to get 2, 3, 4 golds cheaply, and that is a fairly efficient way of adding economy to your deck. 5 and 1 buy to get 3 golds is pretty efficient, as we've seen from Windfall. This is in some ways easier to set up than Windfall. I don't know that it's that much easier to set up than Windfall. Works with gainers. You could do it multiple times, unlike Windfall, in the same turn, if that's something you want to be doing. This might be a way to empty the gold pile. If you've really had a very big turn, you've gained several different cards, you buy this a few times, and the golds really drain very quickly. Again, Windfall, this kind of effect might be more useful when you've got some kind of trash for benefit. Those drawing decks tend to like gold more for costing 6 than for giving you 3 money. Yeah, this one seems strong, but not necessarily busted, because you do have to put in quite an amount of work to get it really humming. And the payoff of getting a few golds is, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's really nice, but it's not like, oh my gosh, it's broken. I was drawing my deck and I was able to add 3 golds instead of 1, right? So just bear that in mind. I mean, you can get more than 3 off this also, right? If I've gained a village and a smithy and a worker's village and a wharf, that's 4 different cards, and then I buy a commerce and I've got 4 golds, right? You can buy a copper to get an extra gold with commerce. You can buy a curse to get an extra gold with commerce if you have enough buys. Not that I'd recommend doing that often, but I don't know. Maybe you really want a lot of gold. I'm not exactly sure why. One of the reasons why might be Triumph. This gets you a bunch of cards and then you triumph after. But I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to our last thing of the day, which is Populate, a 10-cost event. This is the first thing that I think we've seen that costs 10. It says gain 1 card from each action supply pile. Yeah, so that's, you can't choose. It's not up to 1 card from each one. It's every action supply pile, you've got to gain 1. This is probably going to be pretty good, because anymore actions, there aren't that many dud actions, is I guess what I'm saying. But it's going to vary wildly depending on the board, right? If there's not that many different villages and there isn't something like Way of the Ox, then, or I guess just ways in general, right? Ways are going to help this, I think, a bit. Probably depending on what the way is, but a lot of boards there might be 1 to 2 village piles, and there might be 5 or 6 action piles, and a lot of those action piles might be non-terminal, in which case you're good to go. But if you've got 5 terminal piles and only 1 village pile, I don't know that you really want to add that many terminals to your deck. You'd really need to have a lot of villages already. Also, sometimes there's actions that are just not very good for what you're trying to do. So I think there's going to be a lot of cases where this isn't very good because it gives you a lot of cards and you may not want all of them, or it's going to give you a lot of cards that don't work well necessarily altogether. It also costs 10, so you're spending a lot of money to get those things. It is extra gains if you're limited on gains. I don't know how useful that'll be, but it's there for you. But then also sometimes it's going to be absolutely fantastic, right? I gain a king's court and a rabble and a village and a bridge, and if I gain 1 or 2 other weird or garbagey cards, who really cares? I've got a ton of value for my 10 money, right? So in some cases it's going to be fantastic. I guess also one thing that it probably works better with to some extent is trash for benefit cards, because action cards are not free. They cost you a pretty substantial amount of money. And if you have extra ones that you don't really want because they don't fit that well, you can feed them to your trash for benefit cards and still be fine with it because I didn't need the effect of the thing anyway. It probably also works well with Triumph or Gardens. I guess Commerce also can kind of work that way. Or Vineyard, right? You get extra gains for Vineyard. These are all actions. Also, sometimes there's just no or almost no actions on the board. That's going to be pretty rare. So anyway, I think Populate's going to vary wildly depending on the board. Sometimes it's going to look incredibly broken, and sometimes it's going to be actively bad. It really depends on what actions are on the board. Overall, it's probably not that good. I would guess Commerce is typically better. I think my ranking of these cards is probably Toil over Commerce over Populate, and Way of the Ox over this. But it's all kind of hard to evaluate. I'm going to say Way of the Ox over Toil over Commerce over Way of the Mole over Way of the Terminal over Populate, but that's just a wild stab in the dark. We'll have to see as we play with more of these, and I think a lot of them are very contextual and dependent. Yeah, but that's going to do it for this video. We'll see you tomorrow with the last set of previews. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. If there's something I missed, leave a comment. Yeah, thanks for watching, everybody.